Okay, so for the streamer requested video, we're actually going to be doing a unit analysis on Lartoria. And the reason why is because with the upcoming Grail Front, she's actually going to be getting one of her upgrades. I talked about this in the Grail Front preview video, and so I'm actually going to give her her due diligence. I feel like Lartoria is one of those units that a lot of people talk about from time to time. She's definitely always considered to be a decent farmer. She has bukus and bukus of charge in her kit, but I think a lot of people tend to have a very negative opinion of her overall damage performance. So I'm going to try to check my bias at the door as much as I can, but do understand, this is one of my favorite units. So I am just disclosing that to you on the outset so that you guys understand where I'm coming from on it. However, you're probably never going to meet a more qualified person to talk to about this unit. The reason being, I have used her an insane amount on both servers. Both servers I have NP5 of her. Now, you may actually be thinking, well then Cad probably doesn't know what it means to have just an NP1. And you'd be wrong. I actually do. For a long period in time, my JP and my NA were both sitting at NP1, so I'm actually well aware of where she could be, both in the old damage terms with the old support units, as well as in the new sort of systems with Oberon and Koyanskaya, because at both times I actually had her at NP1 in those systems at various points. So again, I'm well aware of what her damage capability can be. Let's actually go ahead and start talking about the Milk King. So right here off the bat, you guys can see she's got about 11,000 attack power. Now, this is not super strong attack power. I think some people would point to this as a point of weakness in her kit. Don't worry about this. It's not that bad. It's not great attack power. I have seen lower, though, for a 5-star. But again, remember, whenever we start talking about these raw stats like this, it takes the entire kit for you to be able to understand what it is that makes them pop off. So again, though, even though she only has around 11k attack power here, she has 15.5 HP. That is really good. That's really strong, really beefy. Now, the bad side to this is going to be that Lartoria doesn't have a hard survival skill in her kit. This is why most people relegate her to more of a farming arrangement, because most people kind of just look at her and go like, well, she's got good charge, so I can make that work, but ultimately I don't want to have to make her go the distance, because something like an NP might just finish her off. The good news is she does have some extra stuff in her kit to maybe help out a little bit more, but yes, you will need to protect her. Thankfully, though, being a buster unit, you should have options, including Merlin out there, so. Again, looking at her attribute here, she is sky traded. This has a lot to do with the fact that even though she's not divine, she kind of is divine, she kind of isn't divine, and so a lot of that has to deal with her story. Just understand she is sky traded, and if you want to think of it as nothing less than just the fact that she basically can fly on her horse. So she does have, again, your standard Lancer, Star Absorption, and Star Gen. It's basically what we come to expect. Her NP charge rate, though, is actually really good. It's 1.1%. I think this is one of the more overlooked aspects of Lartoria, is that actually her card performance is very solid. It's something I've pointed out to people over and over again that, like, yeah, oftentimes when I've done crazy stuff like soloing and stuff with her, I have noticed that, yeah, there are times where she just kind of loops back under the power of her own crits, and it's really, really strong when that does happen. She does have 4% NP charge defense, which is at least 1% higher than the norm. It's not amazing, but hey, I'll take it. And then her death rate's 24%, which is roughly around the average. She is lawful good alignment, which should surprise no one. She is female gendered. She is Arthur, Artoria face, dragon, hominidae, servant, humanoid, sovereign, riding, servant. Wait, sorry, hominidae servant was the prior one. Servant, 7 knight servant, which is one of the newer traits, basically dealing with like Draco, I believe. And then weak to intimate Elish. So looking at her overall deck here, though, it's actually your standard Lancer deck. There's nothing really here that's so crazy. Very many Lancers have 2 Buster, 2 Quick in their deck. I'm not really sure why this is. They just definitely have leaned towards that with Lancers in the past, and with her being not the earliest, she was not a release unit, but she was a unit that, you know, basically ends up being in the earlier side of FGO's history, pretty much right at the, like, 1-year mark. So they kind of learned some things about unit design already by that point, but she is a unit that we know basically from extra materials that was designed from even before that point, so whether or not any of those changes actually made it in remains to be seen. Now, looking at this deck here again, the double Buster cards here are going to be good because you're going to be able to pair that with the NP in order to get a triple Buster chain in order to pop off. The one arts card is going to be a little bit oof because obviously that is going to be one of the things that we're going to want to land on if we want to get back to an NP, but that is partially why she has the 1.1 NP gain rate here. It's made to be strong so that she can actually kind of get back to that, considering she only has the 3 cards really to generate good Noble Phantasm charge with. Now, her arts card is still 1 hit below the average. Our average of hit counts tends to be 3, so our quick cards are perfectly okay with that, and she will have the writing trait, so that'll help that out a little bit more as well. But then she also just has the single hit Buster card. Now, we don't care too much about Buster cards only being 1 hit, so while that may be, you know, as low below average as you can get, it doesn't really matter for the grand scheme of things because other than really Star Absorption, you weren't probably going to generate that much Noble Phantasm with a Buster card anyways, but it really does depend on the unit. We do have some units that have very high Buster hit counts that can actually do a decent job with that. Now, looking at our first skill here, and this is actually the skill that does get the upgrade down the line. It starts out as a 1-trick, 1-turn Buster performance of 50%. And it's a strong skill. It's definitely why her attack power is so low, is because she just has a 50% steroid right there in the face. Which obviously now down the line, we've had way more robust units that do way more and have, again, some pretty crazy laundry list type skills. But certainly for a unit that was released basically in the first year of FGO, this is pretty decent, right? And again, it's also on a 5-turn cooldown, which is significant whenever we start looking at Koyanskaya setups. Because, again, as I've explained before, a 6-turn cooldown skill in a Koyanskaya setup means it can be popped on turns 1 and 3. A 5-turn cooldown in the Koyanskaya setup means it can be popped on turns 1 and 2, or, if you prefer, turns 2 and 3. It just depends on how you use the charge, depends on how you use the cooldown reductions. But again, it allows you to basically pop it back-to-back turns if you actually need it. So where this can be nice is maybe you don't use it turn 1, but instead you use it on, like, turn 2 with maybe a pesky high-health single-wave enemy or something like that, and turn 3 so that you have the damage on turn 3 where you know you're going to have the high-health values, and that can actually work to your advantage in that regard. Now, it gets upgraded to Torrent of Light A+, which again, still includes the 50% Buster up for 1 turn, but now adds 2 50% power mods here at rank 10 for chaotic and evil damage. Now, this is actually great from the standpoint of there are a lot of units out there that fall under either of these niches, and both can be combined here for 100% if you actually want it. So that actually does really help out because she can either, you know, basically dip into it with one of the niches or even potentially both, and it's going to really ramp up and scale up her damage. So this definitely was a solid upgrade. It ends up coming to us here with the Grail front, but we know we have Melisson coming down the line. We know we get Erish getting an NP interlude as well. So you're definitely going to have units that pass her now as a result of this. She was never the strongest AoE Lancer, but she was always someone that just was a very good and, you know, pun intended here, workhorse-like character that could just really do a lot of things for you. So, again, this one still stays on the 5-turn cooldown, but it's definitely a nice upgrade. I did see some criticism where people were saying, well, I wish she would get the NP interlude instead of this, and I kind of agree. I think the NP interlude would have served better, but it doesn't make this a bad upgrade, and please understand that. So this is still a phenomenal upgrade, but yes, she definitely is in need of an NP interlude at this point on JP. So now as we look at the second skill here, you've got Charisma B. This is going to increase the party's attack by 3 turns of 18%, also on a 5-turn cooldown. This is another nice skill that can be popped basically back-to-back. You can pop this on turns 1 and 2, and you will have very nice overlap here for, again, up to like 36% damage there. 36% attack up if you're using Koyanskaya setup in order to be able to double pop it. But again, that just depends on what you're trying to do. You can even get away with stuff like double oberon if you don't actually feel like this is that big of an advantage. But certainly having something like Charisma where you can use it on demand, and that's one of the often considerations that I've seen in comparisons is that, like, Erish Kagall, while she does have Charisma for the party in her kit, it is tied to her NP and being able to utilize that NP. So oftentimes it only gets applied after the first NP. It only can, then be used on subsequent units. So you can maybe double or even triple pop Erish's NP. But if you're triple popping it, you probably didn't need any help from anyone else. And if you're double popping it, then you're almost sort of relying on the benefit being in the third turn. You could mix a unit in a middle wave, but then they're only going to get one of her party-wide charisma. So the advantage here in having this on a skill rather than an NP is we can control when we use it. Again, when it's tied to an NP, it just means you're locked to actually using the NP. So there's upsides to each and there's downsides to each, but it's just different. And in that regard, it gives you a little bit more of like a, hey, I'm going to use it now type of control. But again, really, really nice in the fact that it actually does help out the party. Third skill here is Protection from World's End EX. I think a lot of people actually forget that this skill has a debuff cleanse on it. Can actually be really nice if you are taking her into some sort of challenge environment or just boss or like some sort of like wave nuking thing against a lot of enemies that do debuffs. This can cleanse any sort of like offensive ailment that someone gives her, or again, just get rid of pesky things like actual dots and stuff that someone may be trying to inflict on her. So definitely a very solid thing. The only thing is you're not going to be able to use this if she's stunned or slept or something like that. So do keep that in mind. Better to use it than, better to use it than lose it, basically. But it is going to be one of those deals where you're probably going to be considering more when to use it for the charge purpose. So again, that is the real main factor here is you've got a 6-turn cooldown 50% charge. And this is really strong. Again, the comparison was to Erish Kagall in the past for so long there, where Erish Kagall had 50% charge, but it was also tied to her steroid of 1 turn. So you basically had this weird sort of scenario where if you wanted to charge Erish, you also had to use the steroid, so they were kind of tethered at the hip. With Lartoria's case, it's not attached to any of her steroids, just that cleanse. So again, it really just depends on what your goal overall is. If you don't care about separating the two, it's not a big deal. But if you did and you liked having the ability to use the charge skill, that's definitely nice. And so because this one's a 6-turn cooldown, it allows you to pop it on turns 1 and 3, but still up to you to determine how you want to handle charge order, especially in a Lartoria comp, because she has so much charge, as we'll talk about here upcoming. So again, looking at her passes, not a whole lot, right? Again, this is what a year 1 unit looks like. We don't have all the insane passives that modern units now have. But she does get Magic Resistance B here for some debuff resistance to help out. And then she also gets Writing A, and that is going to help that quick card's performance and star gen. So really, really good there. Again, her append skills here, you've got the extra attack finesse. This one probably is actually pretty decent for her, and the reason why is because I'm going to talk about it with the mana loading here in a second. Lartoria is one of these units that really, mana loading only kind of helps. So you can certainly use it on her. She does get the 20% charge out of that, and then she is a 50% charger on top of it. But Lartoria has a really weird sort of issue right now with the current meta, and that's that she has charge wasting. And I'll talk about that when we get to the Noble Phantasm. But essentially, mana loading is still really good on her, but it maybe is not as good as it could be on other units. And then her third skill, I'm going to be dead honest here and say you probably don't need this. This is anti-ruler attack damage aptitude. There are only a handful of rulers even to date on JP that this basically would allow her to double dip in niches for, again, with the whole like chaotic and evil alignment, because if they're not one of these, odds are you probably shouldn't be using Lartoria against a ruler at that point. It's just not going to be a very good time, a very easy-going battle, because Lartoria doesn't deal that much damage compared to some of the highest Lancers, and you're basically going up against a class that's just naturally resistant to her. So again, if you're going to use that, you want to make sure there's at least some power mods in there to help check that whole class resistance, plus having that. But that's why I say this is really just only rarely ever going to come into play, and it's probably not worth your coins unless you've gotten a lot. Now, let's talk about the Noble Phantasm. One of the things that has always been strong about Lartoria from the get-go has been the fact that she ignores invincibility for 1 turn. She is a 2-hit AoE Buster NP, and so like I talked about, having the 2 Buster cards allows you to form a Buster Brave chain with the NP, which can be really nice if you get that hand dealt on the right turn. Certainly as well, you can maybe even go for a Mighty chain if you get the Quicken Arts card together, but still, this has always been one of her strongest suits, is the fact that she ignored invincibility. For a long time, she was one of the only Lancers that even did this. So basically, this had always been an ace in the hole for her in terms of like, hey, yeah, you had other units, but you maybe would have to take a craft essence on them that enables invincibility piercing in order to get around certain gimmicks in certain fights. In Lartoria's case, you could just instead take a better damage CE because you didn't have to worry about it, since every time she NP'd, she would have it. And the cool part is here too, it's not just the NP that gets it, it applies for the entire turn, so any subsequent attacks on that turn from her will also gain the ability of that ignore invincibility. Then it just deals damage to all enemies, and it's going to charge her own NP gauge with the overcharge effect. Now, this is the big doozy right here. Lartoria is, just like a lot of the other Saber faces here, basically gonna get charge after her NP, which is kind of weird as a buster unit. But it has worked for a long time. In fact, this is how, basically before we ever got Scotty into the game, Lartoria was one of the only buster units that could 3-turn. And the whole reason that she could is because she could actually manage to utilize Merlin in a 3-turn setup. Most other damage dealers didn't actually have the charge to be able to do that. Nowadays, though, that's almost a point against her. She has so much charge that she can't actually effectively use it all. So even though over the course of a 3-turn duration in a double Koyanskaya and Oberon setup, Lartoria actually has so much charge that she would be able to start from 0 with a Black Grail. She can't actually utilize it all. And so as a result, she can't start with Black Grail unless you do funky things. And so one of the things that I'm always asked about with Lartoria is, how would I fix her? How would I give her sort of the ability to pop off? Well, for starters, one of the things that I would do is just flat out give her an NP interlude, because again, you would be able to get up to 400% there, because basically whenever you get an NP interlude, NP2 becomes NP1 and NP5 becomes NP2. So that's the easy way to think about that. So that would just naturally add a decent chunk of damage right there. But one of the things that I would add is I would also add 1 rank of overcharge for self on NP. Because what that would do is that would make it so that she would gain the ability to go up to 30% charge. And that would make all the difference, because right now we have this issue with a lot of units in the Koyanskaya and Oberon systems where Koyanskaya has 50% charge. Oberon has 50% charge and 20% charge. And the issue that you run into is this sort of block 50 charge issue that I've talked about, where some units can't utilize it effectively. I actually talked about this in my Buster System guide, that there's quite a few units that almost have seemingly odd amounts of charge that can't ever be utilized effectively because you can't break up these 50%. So because Oberon has 20%, that does kind of help, but because Lartoria constantly has 20%, there's no real effective way to actually get her to being able to combine that with several other 20% in order to work, especially because it's always going to happen at a set time right after an NP. So pretty much the typical charge scheme is going to work something like this, where you start her out with, like, say, a 50% CE. Again, you use her 50% charge skill turn 1, and right there, that's enough to NP. Turn 2, she refunded 20%, and then you've got what? Double Koyanskaya? So double Koyanskaya is going to charge you to 120%, making that 20% refund there worthless. Then you've got another NP that occurred there on turn 2, so you've got 20% here on the back end. Now you've got basically Lartoria's 50% back and all of Oberon's 70% charge there. So you're basically looking at, again, 140% charge on turn 3. And you would think, well, surely that's enough, right? You just basically wasted, 60% charge, and you started with a 50% C, and you didn't even include the append. It's the problem. You can't actually combine the 20% in such a way to make it from 0. So how this often works and how people get around it is they basically find some way to overcharge Lartoria to get to that 30%, because that can combine with a 20% very easily and make it, again, you could start using the append skill potentially. You could maybe start combining it with Oberon's 20%. and you would actually have a coherent amount there that could be doubled up and could be made to be able to start from 0. We also do have a new, newer craft essence on JP that is basically the overcharge version of Black Grail. I believe it's Muddy Rain or something like that. And again, it's very strong, and it's definitely like an in-between version of Black Grail that's actually stronger than basically like cranking and aerial drive, the other 50% Cs that are really good. So it's actually really solid on her because it allows her to still start from 0. But yeah, that's one of the ways in which I would fix her, is just give her that NP interlude and give her overcharge, and that would absolutely help out. So I'm hoping at some point they do recognize just how strong someone like Melisson is, kind of sitting over the top of a lot of the other AoE Lancers, and then allow, you know, units like Lartoria to get some upgrades. But let's talk damage now. So again, you guys can see this is the NP damage list. It's not totally like 100% something that you need to put all of your faith and investment in and believing. It's not that it's bad or wrong in any way. It's just that the tool is only as good as you guys make it. If you start making wild assumptions about, well, like, oh, say Karna's here on top, surely he's the best AoE Lancer, you're going to get a weird idea, because what this shows is it only shows a unit with max skills under their own firepower against neutral enemies. So it doesn't show you, again, buffs from supports and the optimal sorts of setups that you could get, but it's a good comparison tool to give yourself an idea of where someone stands. It doesn't, however, need to be used against units because, again, pretty much any unit on this list, as long as I put them in the right setup with the right team comp, I can make them pop off. So, again, you have a unit like Karna up here that's functionally a 20% charger and can't utilize the supports too well. You've got units like Romulus that are actually really strong and do have the Roman niche to be able to pop off even harder. But then you've also got units like Lartoria sitting up here. The only issue with someone like Lartoria is she only has the 20% charge, so getting her to work effectively is going to be, again, probably looking at some sort of double Oberon setup. What we do have now is we do have Erish, and Erish for a long time had been someone that had been pretty much beneath Lartoria, kind of at the bottom of the pack in terms of AoE Lancers. But Erish now, in the upcoming months here, I believe at Anniversary this year, will get her NP interlude. That's definitely going to help bump up her damage quite a bit. And again, she also gets the super effective damage against the Earth attribute over here, allowing her to really do some solid damage. Now, again, a lot of people would look at this list and go, oh, well, Melisson's only like 4th on this list. Actually, 5th. I've scrolled down some. She's surely not that strong, right? This is why I say the spreadsheet can kind of give you the wrong idea sometimes if you don't understand how it works. Again, Melisson is a unit that can start with Black Grail, so she gets a huge boost from that. She can get Oberon in there, so she can absolutely double that boost. And then, again, she has a overcharge gimmick that is a 3-turn stacking buster up. So there's a reason why she hits so hard nowadays on JP. And finally, we've started to see some units outpace her. But certainly there's also other concerns here if we're looking at her from a Lartoria perspective, where she also provides Pierce Invincibility, and she kind of has become this almost like pseudo-perfect unit where they're going to have to do a lot of damage buffing to get anyone beyond her because she just naturally is so good. And you'll hear me talk about Melisson as we get closer to the 6.1 banner. I will cover all of those units. But again, down here you basically have Lartoria, and Lartoria can certainly use the NP interlude like we talked about. That would bump her up to basically that 30k right there, which, you know, some people be like, oh my god, Cad, that puts her up at the top up here. And it's like, yeah, it does, but it doesn't at the same time. Like, there's plenty of other units that just absolutely can enforce their niche, like, say, the Roman niche in terms of Romulus. So the fact that he has that makes him super solid. And again, we know how well some of these other units scale. So I think giving her just the NP interlude would be a step in the right direction. But again, here's the chaotic and evil alignment here, coming in at 34k. And then chaotic and evil combined at 46. So definitely some solid damage if you can utilize her niches effectively. And that's where I think for a lot of people, as you start looking upcoming towards someone like Melisson, you don't have to have Melisson. And I don't want to like ever make people feel like they have to roll any singular unit in the game. Probably the only units that I would argue that should be that way are the actual support units, because they're what allow all of your units to pop off. But still, again, yeah, if you don't actually feel like you want someone like Millicent, you don't have to get her. You can use your Roma, you can use your Lartoria, you can use your Erish Kagall, and definitely still do solid damage. And that's the big takeaway from this, is what really makes Millicent strong at the end of the day is being able to do it from 0, but she does lose a lot of damage if you are getting into scenarios where it's like, hey, maybe I'm only operating with an MP1, maybe I'm operating with event CEs instead of a, Black Grail or something like that. So certainly she'll still be a good solid unit for you, and she still is going to be a good farming unit, but you are always going to have other options in that regard. So someone like Lartoria is still really good, and if she does get an upgrade, is poised to be extremely valuable, again, just because of her capability in farming. So again, let me know what you guys think about Lartoria with her banner coming up here. It is going to be an interesting one, I'd say the least. But again, who are you guys going to roll for? Who is your favorite AoE Lancer at this point? I'll be curious to read the comments below. Hope you enjoyed, and have a good one.